Greetings. My name is Letitia Hensley, and I'm the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Director of Family and Community Engagement. We are excited that you are joining us today and know you will gain great insight from this session. At the conclusion of today's session, please provide feedback so that we can continue to support you with amazing sessions that will be provided throughout the year. Now, without further ado, we'll turn it over to our presenters.
Good afternoon, CMS families. Thank you so much. We apologize for the delay, but we thank you for joining us today for our Family Academy Lunch and Learn. Our topic today is Section 504 and Exceptional Children. Please be sure to sign in the Family Academy today's session, which will be in the Q&A. You'll be able to sign in there, and also you will see the link for the slide deck. Translation support is available during today's session in the top right-hand corner. Please select Captions. From there, you will select Show Live Captions, and then you will be able to choose the language of your choice. Once again, in the top right-hand corner, please choose Select Captions. From there, you will select Show Live Captions, then select the language of your choosing from the drop-down. Next slide. We are super excited to engage with you today. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please select the Q&A feature. Once selected, you will be able to type your question into the text box and to be addressed by our presenters at the end. Love to hear from you. Please react and engage with using the react feature to share a thumbs up or an aha moment during our time. At this time, I am pleased to present to you our first speaker, Benjamin Bender, who will be sharing on Section 504.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your patience, guys. We had a little technical difficulties, but we're hopefully to give you some great information on Section 504 and Exceptional Children's Services. My name is Benjamin Bender. I've been with the district for almost 24 years. I am a licensed school psychologist, and I'm the manager of the 504 program. With me, I have some awesome District 504 specialists. We have Nisha McDonald, Lamia Bowen. Next slide, please. The great Amy Cook, Dr. Shelley Goins-Harris, and Rachel Long. So again, we have a full team here to kind of help support the 504 needs of CMS School District. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to start with the federal guidelines, the federal laws that surround Section 504. Next slide, please. So what is Section 504? It is a civil rights law. And what it says is we cannot discriminate on the basis of a student with a disability. It is enforced by the Office for Civil Rights. Back in 2008, it did expand its coverage. So, for example, we have over 8,000 students under Section 504 within CMS. It makes sure that students have equal access to free and appropriate education. And what that means is we need to make sure that students with disabilities have the same access as compared to their non-disabled peers. So we do provide like accommodation services to provide that equal access, but we also have to make sure we don't provide that leg up. So, I give the one of the most common examples of extended time. All right. If a student, such as maybe has a condition like ADHD or anxiety, and they really struggle with timed assessments, then a team may determine, hey, this student may really need extended time on assessments. However, a different student with ADHD or anxiety, but they don't really have any struggles with timed assessments. We cannot give that child that same accommodation of extended time, because then you're providing that child with a leg up. And we will hear, hey, but they'll do better. But a lot of kids will do better with extended time. So we got to make sure that we keep things equitable. And if a student absolutely needs an accommodation to have the equal access, they should actually receive it. But we want to make sure we don't provide that leg up when it's not necessary. Next slide, please. All right, so again, what is Section 504? This is one of my favorite sayings. It provides the individual the opportunity, or the student, to create their desired outcome without discrimination. All right. Again, we can't give that leg up, but we can give that child with a disability that same equal access as a child with a non-disabled condition. We can give them the opportunity to, succeed. We can't do it for them, but we can give them that same equal access. Next slide, please. So how do you become eligible under 504? You first have to have what we would call a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Okay. You only need one to have that major life activity impairment. That could be, thinking or breathing. How is impacted? So think of ADHD. That's an impairment. What does it substantially limit? We have another slide that kind of drives the team decisions on how you should make a student eligible under Section 504. And like we said in 2008, the expansion of eligibility really increased. And so with that law, we really expanded on our services of Section 504. Next slide, please. So how 504 relates is that, again, students with disabilities must have the same rights to free and appropriate education as their non-disabled peers. A student with ADHD must have that same access as a student without ADHD. And again, the reason why we have to do this is because school districts receive federal funding. And as a result of receiving federal funding, we must follow the laws that surround Section 504 and free and appropriate education. Next slide, please. So a lot of people ask, hey, what's the difference between a 504 plan, an IEP, and something called an individual healthcare plan? So a Section 504 plan is a civil rights law, like we talked about, prohibits discrimination based on their disability. Okay, it's made by a school team, and they may or may not need a plan. They may be eligible, but not necessarily need a plan. And they receive those procedural safeguards and protection under Section 504. Now, as opposed to 504, an IEP, and Eric will go a lot more into it, but the key word you'll probably hear is something called specially designed instruction. And that's instruction that's geared specifically to support that kid. Specially designed instruction is reserved for students only with IEPs, and they have to qualify for one of these 14 disabling conditions. I don't want to steal Eric's thunder. He'll get a little bit more into that, but those kids with IEPs receive more intense supports. Now, a kid that has a medical plan, such as something for diabetes or asthma, may need what's called an individual healthcare plan. Really, there's kind of two of healthcare plans in CMS. There's something called an EAP, which is an emergency action plan, or an IHP, which is called an individual healthcare plan. Now, an EAP is what do you do in an emergency? If you have a child who's an epileptic, what are you supposed to do if that child's having a seizure? Okay. Then you have something called an individualized healthcare plan. And that's what are the medical interventions that a child needs on a day-to-day. So such as like a diabetic, measuring their carb content, their insulin doses, like all that kind of stuff could be part of the healthcare plan. And a child can absolutely have a healthcare plan and a 504 plan. They can absolutely have an IEP and a healthcare plan. But in our district, a student typically does not have a 504 plan and an IEP plan. And that is because anything that would be in a 504 plan can be written into the IEP plan because an IEP looks at the overall needs of the child. Next slide, please. So who makes these decisions? So a 504 team membership, the federal law has these different categories, all right? And they're kind of general and vague, but we try to put some language in it to help teams understand who should be at the table. So federal law says that it must include a person who knows the child well. That could be the parent, the counselor, a teacher, a coach. They must also have someone that can interpret the data. That could be the counselor, the psychologist, a nurse. They understand the disability. And then a person that can make placement decisions. A lot of times that's what you'll hear this term called an LEA or an administrator. Those are typically the ones that understand the placements under Section 504. But those don't have to be the only people. We strongly recommend people like occupational therapists, physical therapists, audiologists, mental health providers. They can be part of the team because they can bring very good knowledge and information to a team so they understand what decisions to make. We do acknowledge that, hey, parents, they do have a right to legal representation. We do say, though, that if a parent does bring legal representation, CMS does have to have our own legal representation at the meeting. So that is just something that we like to pass on to our parents. Next slide, please. All right, so every 504 meeting starts with an evaluation. We're determining that eligibility. Is there a substantial limitation? Is there a physical or mental impairment? And the way that we come to this is we look at all different information. The federal law says we have to look at a variety of sources of information. That's parent input, teacher input. Is there any special education records, discipline history? Is there interventions there to help any kind of academic or behavioral gaps? Mitigating measures. Mitigating measures are anything to try to help a child. So that could be tutoring, medication, therapy, all those kind of things that are used to try to help with a medical condition. We want to look at grades, any student health information. What diagnoses do we have? Do we have something from a private therapist? State test results, attendance, all this information should be used to look at eligibility under Section 504. Next slide, please. So when you're answering eligibility, you're answering 3 questions. Does the student have a physical or mental impairment? Does it impact a major life activity? And does the physical or mental impairment substantially limit a major life activity? And we'll go through these in a little bit more. Next slide, please. So major life activities, that's eating, sleeping, standing, you think of all the activities you do throughout the day. Is your condition substantially limiting one of these things? The other side of the coin is the major bodily functions. That's your immune system, your digestive system. So if you have diabetes, that's going to impact your endocrine system. So those are the 2 you're looking at: major life activities and major bodily functions when you're looking at that impairment. Next slide, please. Now, the federal government doesn't help us define substantial limitation. All they say is it's up to the team to determine, is it substantial limiting? So really what you have to do is look at the child in the raw state. And what that means is when you're looking at eligibility on 504, you have to strip away all the positive effects of mitigating measures. So what is that child like without medication, without therapy, without tutoring? And if you see a substantial limitation compared to a non-disabled peer, then the child is eligible under Section 504. Okay? I do say, hey, if the team's not sure, they should err on the side of the child, and typically the child is eligible under 504. Next slide, please. So like we talked about, without the effects of mitigating measures is not taken account when looking at 504 eligibility. Like we talked about, mitigating measures could be like medication, counseling, therapy, the healthcare plan, tutoring. Now, there is one exception: eyeglasses. That is the exception under mitigating measures for Section 504. But anything else that's used to help mitigate the impacts of a disability, that is what's called a mitigating measure. Next slide, please. So it's interesting, and this is a part that I'm going to pause and make sure we go over a little bit, is first, a team makes a team decision on whether they're eligible under 504. But here's another difference between an IEP and a 504. Under an IEP, a child's eligible and they receive a plan to go along with supporting the child's needs. The difference is under 504, a child can be eligible under 504, but actually not need a plan. And I get, hey, Ben, why would you do that? Well, the law states that you are going to look at eligibility without mitigating measures, without medication, without therapy. But when you consider whether a child needs a plan or not, you do have to put into account mitigating measures, such as medication. So if a child has ADHD and is on that right medication, is getting that therapy and the counseling, and there is just not an impact seen at the school level, that is a child that is probably eligible under Section 504, but because there is not an impact in the school environment, would not need a plan under Section 504. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So this is the guidance that we give teams. Is you first have to identify the diagnosis and the impairment. Okay. What is the major life activity that's impacted? ADHD, anxiety, asthma. Then you look at what the substantial limitation is. What's the major life activity? So example, ADHD, it impacts concentration, such as anxiety. Maybe it impacts learning. If you are looking at asthma, it impacts breathing. So then you look at, okay, what kind of accommodations do you need to help with the concentration? Does the child need redirection? Does the child need check for understanding? Maybe they don't get the questions, in a test. They need things explained to them. Maybe they need extra time. They run out of time because they get anxious. Again, you do have to see that impact in the school environment. We do not just give accommodations, because I will say this, is that it can be harmful to give a child accommodations when they don't need it. I can't go to my boss and say, hey, you know what? I was anxious. I couldn't get that report in on time. The older kids we need them to learn to manage their own disabilities. We want to support them. But like I just sent off a kid to college just about a month ago. Guess what? He is on his own. He is his own parent. Okay. We've got to support our kids, but make sure that they are ready to become strong and functional adults when they go off to college and be a strong person in the workplace. So that's my public service announcement. We'll keep moving. Next slide, please. All right. So again, here's some examples, guys. I'm not going to read through these. You will get a copy of the slide deck, but it kind of shows you how you go from diagnosis, major life activity, and the accommodations. You got to make sure they kind of match. If you have, let's say, something like seasonal allergies, all right, and that kid may need accommodations such as, during pollen season, they don't go outside, or they need water during testing because of that. But do they need an accommodation such as like a read aloud? A team would have to say, okay, explain to me the seasonal allergies and how it impacts like breathing, and that they need a test read aloud to them. Now, I'm not saying no, and that's a team decision, but you got to make that connection. Next slide, please. All right, very important slide. A plan has to be followed as written. Schools do not have the option of, well, I think he needs extended time in this subject, but not in this subject. If a 504 plan says he needs extended time in math, he gets extended time in math. Whatever is written on there, they have to follow. We also want to absolutely respect confidentiality, okay? When your child's plan is given to a school, not everybody gets it. It's only those that our legal department says has a vested interest in the child. So make sure that, those plans are seen only by those that need to be seen. Your child's disability is absolutely an importance to us, and we got to make sure that we follow their confidentiality. Next slide, please. Something that's interesting is we do want to let you know that, hey, we can't require a parent to go out and get a diagnosis such as, ADHD or anxiety. Our school psychologists do what are called educational determinations. So if a school does suspect some attention concerns, some anxiety, our school psychologists can do their own evaluations to see if they meet the eligibility requirements under Section 504. And again, I want to stress this, it's not a diagnosis. It is called an educational determination. Now the team does have that, ability to say, yes, we should move forward with the evaluation, or no, there has to be a concern. I've heard, well, why don't we just do it to find out? And that's not the way things work, whether it's in the IEP world or the 504 world. There has to be data to kind of support our evaluation process. Next slide, please. Okay, big one, transitory impairments. I get this call every single year. Student breaks his arms or legs in a football game or over the weekend, and they're like, oh, we need an emergency 504. And that's not typically what is appropriate under the law. Transitory impairments are conditions that last less than 6 months. So is there an impairment? Absolutely. If I broke both my legs and I can't walk, I'm impaired. But under the law, those are typically transitory impairments, because after a couple months, that impairment's not no longer impactful. So again, if you ever get this kind of situation where your kid breaks their legs or something like that and needs some type of transportation support, or they need more time transitioning for classes, and they say, we just can't do anything. You're going to have my contact information. And we want to make sure that kids, whether it's 2 months or 2 years, they get the support they need to access the buildings. Next slide, please. Post-secondary, I had to deal with this just a couple months ago. We want to make sure that plans are updated their senior year or at least their junior year so that kids and they're adults by the time they go off to college can take those plans into college. Now, that plan may not be implemented exactly like how it is in high school, but at least I get emails every year from a kid that's at Wilmington or Chapel Hill or State, and like, hey, can you send me my plan so that I can give it to our disabilities office or what student services, and they will take that plan and determine if that that student is in need of any kind of supports at the college level. So that some of those services do actually carry over into post-secondary education. Next slide, please. So homebound, I don't want to spend too much into it because this doesn't impact a lot of students in our district, but I think it is important to acknowledge that we do have a small group of population students that receive homebound services, either under a 504 or an IEP. It is the most restrictive. You are basically saying this child cannot come to school either because of a physical or mental condition. It is very limited instruction. We have to be very upfront. This is not homeschooling. This is a couple hours of maybe some one-on-one instruction to help that child get back to school. It is for at least 4 more weeks. We typically need some kind of medical documentation to support that placement because it is very restrictive. I think if we go on to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about the impact homebound has. Yeah. Oh, there we go. The academic impact. They may get 1 to 4 hours of just instruction a week. All right. It should be temporary. We want to try to look at maybe a partial day before we go all the way over to homebound. We also want to consider the social emotional impact. They are removed from the school environment. They are not with their friends. And so we really need to just minimize this program as much as possible. For some kids, they need it. Absolutely. But we want to try everything we can before we go into the homebound because of what you see here, the impacts both academically and social emotionally. Next slide, please. So again, one back, please. Thank you. So child find. There we go. All right. Child find is just a mandate that we must follow. And I like putting it in here. It is our school's responsibilities to identify and locate or evaluate children that we suspect having a disability. This goes for both 504 and EC. And so we have to, as a district, if we suspect something, we have to evaluate for it. Okay. And now it does get tricky. How do we suspect? Suspect is a bit subjective and it can be challenging, but it's up to the team to say, hey, do we suspect a disability? Do we need to evaluate either under an IEP or a 504 process? So, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but just to know that our district, if we suspect a diagnosis, if we suspect a disability, we are entitled and we are required to evaluate for it. Again, our school counselors are really our big point of contact if you have any questions about a lot of these things. Next slide, please. This is our help desk. All right. You also are going to have our contact information here. This is not just for our school staff. This is for parents. This is for teachers. This is for principals. We want to make sure that we're here to support you guys, to make sure you have knowledge. I definitely, last year when I did this, I got numerous phone calls and I welcomed every one of them to make sure parents felt supported in the process. And we're here to help you out. Next slide, please. Okay. We're actually going to save all the questions to the end, and I want to make sure we have enough time for the great Mr. Eric Bailey to teach us about the IEP process.
Thank you, Mr. Bender, so much. You made my job even easier because a lot of the things I was going to touch on, you've touched on, so I appreciate that. So thank you. Like you said, my name's Eric Bailey. I'm one of the Exceptional Children Program Managers for the district. This is my 26th year in special education. I was a high school special ed teacher for many years. And so once a teacher, always a teacher. So it's my honor to come and talk to you guys today about the Exceptional Children's Program in Special Ed. We're going to start with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or what we like to call IDEA. And Ben touched on this briefly in his presentation, but it is an act that requires CMS to provide a free, appropriate public education. A lot of times we call that FAPE. One thing you'll know with exceptional children is we talk in acronyms, and so that's something that that I'm trying to make sure we say the whole verbiage and not just the acronym. So that is a free and appropriate education to children who need special education and related services because of a disability, and this applies to every single school in CMS. This is a requirement for every school in CMS. Every child with a disability can go to any of our schools in CMS, and there has to be an EC teacher there to support that student for his or her needs. Next slide, please. And our primary purpose for our Exceptional Children's Program, not just here in CMS, but throughout the state, throughout the country, is we want to make sure that students with disabilities develop academically, physically, and emotionally through the appropriate individualized education in what's called, this is really important, the least restrictive environment. And the LRE, as we call it, it's a principle within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that mandates children with disabilities be educated alongside their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent that's appropriate. And it's important to remember that what the least restrictive environment is different for each student. So what may be more restrictive or seem more restrictive for one student may actually be the least restrictive for another student based on that individual student's needs and their disability. And we're going to get into that and a little deeper in just a few more slides. Okay, next slide, please. And so a student, if you qualify as a student with a disability, you receive what's called, we call it an IEP, but it stands for an Individualized Education Program. And this outlines the different goals, the different accommodations, all the needs that that child has, that those unique needs that that child has based on their qualifying disability. And this IEP is created through a team, and you use formal and informal evaluations to determine eligibility in accordance with state guidelines. And those state guidelines are different based on every state. So we're going to talk about that a little further on too, about what qualifies a student in North Carolina may not qualify a student coming from another state. Next slide, please. So what is an IEP? It's a legally binding document outlining special ed and related services for students with disabilities. It's developed by a team, and that team includes includes students when they're at the age of consent, which is 14, teachers, and school staff. Now, there has to be what's called a local education agency. That's the person that's representing the district. And a lot of times for schools, it's going to be one of their administrators, either the principal or the assistant principal that serves in that role. But sometimes there are more severe needs, or there's different things that we're considering where it actually requires a district local education agency. So someone at the district level like myself may come in and sit on that meeting to help support. And we'll talk about that some more in future slides. And it's important to say that an IEP includes goals for the student to achieve based on their disability and their needs. And you're going to be a part of that team working together to come up with these goals. And the accommodations, that's another huge section that that parents are involved in to help bridge an accommodation helps bridge that gap between where they're performing and what their potential is to achieve. I always said we want to, and Ben kind of touched on this too in his presentation, we want to level the playing field. We don't want to give them an advantage. So that's what the accommodations in the IEP do. It gives them access to the general curriculum to as much extent as they can have it, and it really levels that playing field for them. Next slide, please. Okay, now in North Carolina, there are 14 disabling categories that a student can qualify for. So it's important if you have a student or a child and you're moving from, let's say, New York to North Carolina, it's important when you move to the school and you enroll your student, that you let the school know my child has an IEP. And if you don't have the most recent IEP on you, make sure that they reach out to the previous school who will have that information, because it's important to determine. We have to open an evaluation here in North Carolina to determine if they qualify for special education services in North Carolina, because like I said, what qualifies one student in one state may not qualify in North Carolina. So it's very important, if you already have a child with an IEP, to make sure that that enrolling school has all the documentation, the most up-to-date documentation that you have. Okay, next slide. Okay, continuum of services. So many students, the majority of students with disabilities, are able to have their needs met in a regular classroom. So a lot of times we call that like a co-taught setting. So they'll be with their non-disabled peers, but there may be two teachers in there, a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, but they're in the general education setting. And they'll receive accommodations or modifications to the curriculum to make sure we're leveling that playing field again. But there are some students that require more intensive support that may not be able to be successful within that general education setting. But CMS offers a full continuum of services to meet the needs of the students with disabilities. And we're going to see a visual of that continuum on the next slide, please. Oh, I think we went one too far. There we go. And so you'll get a copy of this, so it's easier to see once you have the bigger copy pulled up. But at the top, you'll see there's the regular level of service. And again, that's kind of considered the co-taught, where they're in a gen ed classroom, but there may be a special ed teacher coming into the classroom to support the needs of those students. We have resource level. That's where students may need a little more one-on-one support or small group support. So they may come out of the regular ed setting for the that's allotted within the IEP and work specifically with the special education teacher at that school to get the support they need. We also have what's called separate settings. So in CMS, we have what are called our specialized behavior support classes. So that's students that struggle with their behavior and have behavioral disabilities that really struggle in the gen ed classroom. So in select schools, in many schools, in our elementary and middle schools, we have what's called the SBS, or the specialized behavior support classes, where they're there, the majority of they in small group with special ed teachers receiving their educational needs, their English, math, science, social studies. They're also getting that behavioral support. They're learning how to control their anger, how to manage their behavior. So the goal is they can go to a less restrictive environment, hopefully to go back into the general ed setting once they have adopted and adapted those skills to be successful. And then we also have public separate schools. We have two of those in CMS. One is Metro School, and that's more for our students with severe cognitive disabilities, medically fragile students. And then we have Charlotte-Mecklenburg Academy, and that's more for students with severe emotional disabilities that really just need that public separate school to be successful. And they still get all of their core classes, but those two schools have 100% of students with disabilities attending those schools. And like Ben touched upon, the most restrictive is hospital homebound. And they can, and it's very, very restricted. So like he said, we like to limit that, and it's never intended for long term. It's considered for short term. And if you do have, or potentially in the future have a student or a child that's on homebound, it's important that that school meets regularly to review that IEP to say, when can this student come back? Because just as Ben said, we want them to get back in the school as soon as possible, because that's where the best education is going to take place, and not at the home setting where they're not with their non-disabled peers. They're not getting that much support throughout the day. But it is appropriate for certain students at certain times in their lives when it's needed. Next screen, please. Next slide, please. And this is very important, and it's linked, so you'll get this. This makes sure that you as a parent know the rights for your students with disabilities. And they're linked here in English and in Spanish. I would suggest, I've read through this many times as a special ed teacher and now working at the district level. It's important to know the law and the regulations that support your students with disabilities, because the best advocate for your students is yourself. And I've always said that to my parents, is the best advocate for your child is you and that child as they get older. Okay, next slide. And this is just kind of like EC leadership at a glance. It's kind of hard to read on this screen, but like I said, when you're looking at it on your own, you can really see this. We are a huge department. We serve right now, there's over 18,000 students that we serve as a student with a disability. And so we have 5 different directors that support with that. We have Marianne Hawk, who's our educational director and really supports from an educational perspective. We have Kalisa Norman, who's our director that supports from accountability, compliance, and budget perspective. We have Cheryl Mandel, who supports our preschool, exceptional children preschool departments. We have Tammy Holt, who is our itinerant director. So she supports our related service people like our speech, our OT, our PT, our homebound students. And then we have Dr. Amy Thornburg, who is our comprehensive uh, improvement school director, and she really supports those schools that are considered high needs like ATSI, CSI schools. And the whole goal for all of that, and we have about 450 people that work for us under, so we're a huge department, but it takes all of these people to make sure that we're educating our wonderful students with disabilities to the best of their ability. Okay, next slide. And this is where can you get assistance? So this summer, I spent a great deal of time and effort updating our EC department website, the public facing, which you all can see. So I would love for you guys to go there. It's linked. And just say we want to make it more accessible and easier to navigate for our parents and families. So please make sure you provide feedback to me. I would love that because I want to make sure that we have everything on that website that you may need. We also have the Let's Talk app, which every department in the CMS has, so you can always call through that. You come visit us with the Education Center here, and there's our address. And we also have someone, Ms. Kim Tucker. She is our parent liaison, and she fields all of our phone calls that come in from our parents. And she's amazing. She's a former EC teacher, district supporter, and she retired and she came back. And so she just has a wealth of knowledge of how to support and lead you in the right direction. But I would say your best start for when you have questions is your child's school, because they're the experts. They're the ones that know your child the best, and can really support you at that grassroots level to really help. And if needed, or you need a little extra support, always call us, because that's why we're here. We're that ancillary support to support the schools, the teachers, and the families in the larger community. Okay, next slide. Okay, now's the time for questions for Ben or myself. Like I said, we have about 10 minutes. We can do questions. You can put them in the Q&A. And if we don't get around to them, we're going to be creating an FAQ so we can ensure that we have a location for all of those questions with the answers that you'll have access to as well.
Well, thank you so much, Eric and Ben. We do have a few questions in our Q&A feature. The first question I have is, my child is coming from another state. I would like to know how those transitions would work at their new school. My student has an IEP plan from another state. How does that work at the new school?
At the new school, good question. So we have to offer what's called a comparable service plan. So like I said, what may qualify a student with a disability in another state may not qualify them there. But until we determine that, we have to do our own evaluations. We do what's called a comparable service plan. So we take that IEP, the school does, from that other state, and then creates a comparable service plan of what we can offer while we're doing that testing. Great question. But again, make sure that you bring all of that updated paperwork to your school and to the EC department at that school.
All right, thank you for that. Another question, can a 504 plan be used in college as well?
That's a great question. It's typically not called a 504 plan. It may be like a support plan. It kind of transitions to what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so typically what they do is they take the 504 plan from, let's say, Myers Park High School, South Meck, or Audrey Kell, and the student takes it to the student services department, disability department, whatever they talk about. You do learn about it in I found out you do learn about it in orientation. I got to talk to the person who does it at Wilmington, but they provide to them, and then they can see what is appropriate at the college level. Again, sometimes you can't modify a lot of that college curriculum. You can do your best to try to implement what you can that was on the high school plan.
All right, perfect. Another question, my daughter received an autism anxiety disorder diagnosis. The parent is thinking they need a 504, but according to this session, maybe it should be an IEP. So they're asking a question about that. The second part of that, does it have to do with the level of disability, or the individual student needs. I just want to make sure we're starting with the right thing.
All right. So, Eric, if it's okay, I'll start with me because
You start and then I'll
least
end.
there you go. Right. So it does, especially with the autism diagnosis. I'm a school psychologist by training. So, I do know that autism is one of the 14 disabling conditions under the IDEA. It's the second part. You pretty much answer it yourself in that it is based on the needs of the child. I would usually say, like, autism doesn't necessarily translate to an IEP. We have many, many students with autism that are served under a 504. Like Eric said, you want to serve a child in the least restrictive environment. If that child does not need specially designed instruction, such as what's in an IEP, an individual education plan, program, excuse me, then a 504 is what's needed. What my recommendation is that you consult with the school, you make sure they have all the documentation, and then they typically, a lot of times they may leave it up to the 504 team. They may start there. It may be referred out to the IEP team. It really is just based on the needs of your child. I'll hand it over to Eric to finish it up for me.
You said that beautifully. And I would just say, when you do go to the school, every school, we have what's called multi-tiered systems of support, which is MTSS. And basically that's everything that a school does to support your child. And there's members of the MTSS team at every school, and they really look at if a teacher brings a need of a child to the team or the parents do, it's the responsibility of the school to really look at that and kind of figure out which direction we need to go based on the data. Everything is data, whether it's a 504 or an IP. Everything is data driven, and that's a good thing because when you have the data, it makes it a little more black and white, so you can really make those better informed decisions as a team. That's the important part. As a team, it takes more than just one person to make this decision, and you all are definitely part of those teams.
Great, thank you. So another question, how often should we review with the school team our IEP goals? A parent said they realigned their child's IEP goals in February. So should they let the new teacher and team know that it may be time to relook at the realigned goals now?
That is another great question. You all are coming up with some amazing questions today. So by law, we have to do an annual review once a year. But as a parent, you have the right to call and request an IEP at any time that you want to. So for instance, especially like say your child's IEP was done in February and they went from elementary to middle school or from middle school to high school. I think it's perfectly appropriate to say, hey, the school year's starting new. My child's in a different school. He or she, you guys don't know my child. So I think it's perfectly appropriate. As a parent, you can call an IEP meeting or request an IEP meeting at any time. Great question.
When are kindergartners evaluated for exceptional children? Do we receive visibility into what is evaluated and what their assessment is like?
Another great question. So we have students in our pre-K programs that are students with disabilities. Again, it goes back to that suspected disability, and it goes back to working with the school for that, and any outside documentation you have, you can bring in as well. Can you repeat that question again? There, it seems like a two-part. I want to make sure I didn't leave any. I want to answer all parts of it.
Okay, let me go back. I'm sorry. When are kindergartners evaluated for exceptional children? That's the first part. Do we receive visibility into what is evaluated and what their assessment is?
Oh, very good. So when you're in an IEP meeting and it's determined that you will move forward with testing as a team, you go in depth and talk about which tests will be done, because there are certain evaluations and tests that are done based on the suspected disability that you're testing that student for. So yeah, great question. But you are involved in that whole process, and the team will go over which tests will be done.
So we do still have more questions. If we can ask a few more. My child has an IEP from another state for speech therapy. I was informed that the school has sent over the most updated IEP to the new school, but I also have a copy. How do I go about making sure my child still gets the needed support?
I would just either call the school, or if you can't, even better, go and meet them in person and just request a meeting. Say, I want to make sure that you guys have all the necessary paperwork that I have so we can make sure that my student is getting the support that he or she needs. But I would say, yes, definitely go there and talk with the school team because that's the best way to make sure that your child is getting everything he or she needs.
How do we know when a 504 or IEP is necessary and who starts the process?
So I think Eric touched on a very important term, and that's multi-tier system support. And that is basically, it is anybody who sees the need for a child's support, whether it's under 504 and IEP. That can be the parent, and that can be the teacher, it can be the administrator, counselor, psychologist. It is a team effort to see if a child is suspected of having a disability, whether under 504 or an IEP. And like Eric said, a lot of that is just based on data. It can be academic data, behavioral data. It can be data that a parent brings a private evaluation to the school. So looking at all those pieces of information, it can be anybody that's part of the team that can start the referral process under an IEP or 504. Eric, what would you like to add to that?
Nothing. You said that perfectly. Great job, Mr. Benda.
Another question, are all of my child's teachers made aware of the IEP and accommodations? If these are not being met, what guidance can you provide?
Yes, at the beginning of every year, all accommodations should be shared with general education teachers because they need to be able to support your child. And those are accommodations based on the IEP. And some children may have accommodations in one class and another, just it's based on the IEP and your child's individual needs. But if you're suspecting that they're not getting that, I would call the school and ask to set up. It doesn't have to be an IEP meeting. It can be a parent-teacher meeting and just ask for the documentation of how they're progress monitoring that they're actually incorporating and using those accommodations effectively and appropriately when they're supposed to be.
All right, I think we can do one more question before we have to wrap it up. How long is an evaluation good for? I had one done for my child in 2023, but was being told a new one would need to be done. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, evaluations are done every 3 years. But again, as the parent, you can request an IEP and say, like, if you have outside evaluations done or you suspect something has changed about your child, you can request, and then the team as an IEP team can look at the data and say, maybe we do need to reevaluate before the 3 years, but you have to do a reevaluation at least every 3 years.
And Section 504 follows the same pattern of evaluations every 3 years, unless there's additional diagnostic information or additional concerns that would encourage a team to do a reevaluation.
Okay. Can we do 2 more questions? I think we have a couple more. If my student has an IEP, does this affect their chance to get into an AIG school, academically and intellectually gifted school?
Absolutely not. We have many students in our district that are considered twice exceptional. So they're both AIG and EC. Again, just because a student has a disability doesn't mean that they are not one of the top performers in our district. It just means that we have to put the accommodations and that specially designed instruction in place to allow them to reach that potential. But no, that does not take them out of being part of the AIG program.
Perfect. My child has Down syndrome and rides the bus. Our transportation personnel, both conductor and assistant, I guess driver and assistant, equipped to aid my child in case of an emergency.
Yeah, that would be, I would reach out to your school because it depends on if your child is in the general ed setting or in the extensions classroom or at Metro school. But depending on the different level of service, many buses will have like bus monitors on there to really support the needs of the children on certain buses. But yeah, I would reach out to your school. There's usually assistant principal, whomever's over transportation at your school can help support with that.
If my child has had an IEP for years with little improvement, would a 504 be more appropriate?
Ooh. Yeah, you got us there. So I can say it. I can answer almost Any question with 2 words, it depends. I mean, you really have to look at the needs of the child. We do want to encourage least restrictive environment. If a child has met all their IEP goals, then absolutely I would recommend an exit from the IEP program. And then if the child still needs, let's say they don't need specially designed instruction, but they still need some of those accommodation supports and services, then a 504 can absolutely be provided. A child is exit IEP and provide a 504. So in that case, again, it just depends on the needs of the child.
Yeah, and I would say if you're concerned because your child has had an IEP for years and you're not seeing that growth, again, as the parent, you can call an IEP meeting anytime and say, let's look at this data. Let's holistically look at this data over these number of years as my child's gone through the educational system in Charlotte or wherever they're at, and where they've been at if they've come to us later, and just say, what is the data showing? Because as teachers, we're supposed to be tracking and progress monitoring and keeping data on how your child is doing and updating those goals accordingly to making sure that those goals within that IEP are the most appropriate, because those goals are what help drive your child to succeed and to continue to improve.
For a disability that's purely physical, is an IEP needed exclusively for classes like PE, or what does this look like?
That's a very good question. So again, I would make sure, is this something that impedes his or her learning? We do have adapted physical education. And again, I would talk to your school about that, because again, that's an IEP team decision. They have to determine, is this physical impairment preventing my child from accessing the curriculum in the way that he or she needs?
Yeah, and the only thing I can add is, do we need adaptive PE? That's specially designed instruction.
Yes.
Could it be just accommodations? Like we have students that are in wheelchairs or have difficulty with walking. They just have a 504 because we may just need to accommodate the environment instead of just totally modifying adaptive PE.
Mhm.
It just depends on the needs of the child.
All right, we're going to take one more question. I know there are other questions, and we'll definitely create that FAQ. But one last question before we have to wrap it up. In the slide, to determine if your child needs an IEP, what do you mean by specific learning disability?
Oh, so for a specific learning disability, that means they have a specific learning disability in either reading, writing, mathematics. That can be fluency, anything like that. So that's what it means. It is a specific learning disability in reading, writing, mathematics, and language. Or writing.
So we want to thank all the families for attending today's Family Academy Lunch and Learn. And a special thank you to our presenters, Eric and Benjamin. You guys were amazing. Thank you so much for your valuable information shared on 504 and EC. Families, please remember, if you haven't done so, to complete the attendance link pinned in the Q&A. And we hope that you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.